Welcome, everybody. I hope you guys had a fantastic morning, a good lunch, and are all fueled up for this afternoon's sessions. I'm Beth Schultz, Enterprise Connect Program Co-Chair and Editor of No Jitter, and it's my privilege to co-moderate this year's Mobility Summit with our Mobility Track Chair, Michael Finneran, who is also President of DBRN Associates, and esteemed panel of industry experts. Now, before I bring those folks on stage, I have just a couple of quick notes for our audience. The first is that, if you participated in the UC Summit this morning, you know that we're taking audience questions via Twitter this year. And so if you could tweet those questions using the hashtag EC16 or mention @EnterpriseCon, and we will get some of those answered at the end of our session here today. So enterprise mobility. The big question that we're exploring today is, does IT need a rethink on enterprise mobility? And that kind of stems from the situation we have in organizations, pretty pervasively in organizations, where the marketing and the digital channels are really focused on the B2B, the consumer-facing mobile applications, while enterprise IT focuses on the B2E or business-to-employee applications. And so the one side of the company is dealing with all those kind of cool and innovative things to encourage customer engagement, while IT has to do everything to enable employees to communicate, whether that's via email or text messaging or conferencing, as seamlessly and conveniently and securely, whether they're sitting in the conference room or, on the side of the road in their car. And that is obviously a big challenge. And we have been hearing so much about the mobile-first enterprise and all sorts of new technologies coming up, bubbling up to deal with the mobile-first enterprise. Yet there's still a very pervasive feeling that IT is simply not doing enough to take advantage of enterprise mobility and really use it to help fuel transformational change, improve the way that workers work. So the big question, does IT need a reboot on enterprise mobility? And let's bring out our panelists and have them address that question. I am going to introduce these folks in alphabetical order by company name. So first, we have Lee Wagner, who is AVP of Mobility Solutions Services with AT&T.
Hey.
Hi, Lee. Second chair there. Next, we have Josh Hazlett, who is the General Manager of Mitel Next. Hi, Josh.
Thank you, Beth.
Joseph Martin, who is the Director of National Solutions Engineering with Sprint.
Thank you.
Yep. And Brian Katz, Director of the EUC Mobile Strategy with VMware. And of course, for many of you, a familiar face, Michael Finneran, my co-moderator.
Thanks, Beth.
So, gentlemen, as I said, we see this organizational split, B2C, B2E, B2C that's on fire, B2E, really not so much. So, how do we get from taking what we see happening in the B2C channels and putting it to use in B2E? Do you agree that there's sort of this disconnect between what's going on, and how do we get that, diminish that and push forward?
Yeah, well, I think it, and we see this with a bunch of our clients, is do you take the principles that exist in B2C and apply them to B2E? And I think the main one is, do you make the content relevant to the person that's using the content? And I think there's kind of two real dichotomies of that. The first is generational. Are you presenting things in text and other forms for millennials, as an example? And then the second is, Do you just provide all the apps in a big lot, or do you create the apps that are relevant to group or person and present that to them in a way that's relevant to that group or person, as opposed to just every app? Because there is an app overload everywhere, and the more you make it personal, the more likely they are to use it.
I think the key thing that we see at Mitel is, as UC vendors, we've traditionally focused on knowledge workers. And so when you think about the way that we create apps and we extend UC communications, we focus on people that get productivity from the traditional PC environment and desk phones. And as we start to see the transition, the pervasiveness of mobile devices and smartphones in the hands of other communities of workers inside the company, the transition of B2E becomes much more important. The productivity gains that we were able to leverage with knowledge workers, with leveraging the PC and the desk phone, have really been realized. And at this point, when we talk about, is UC a reality, we need to start looking at the areas where productivity gains have not been realized. And so one of the things Mitel's done is focused on identifying SaaS providers that can extend workflow products to service worker communities and information worker communities versus knowledge workers, and then embed communications in those to improve those workflow enhancements. So I think as far as IT's consideration of where they should look for productivity and how they should address B2E, it's really looking at the mobile-only and mobile-first workers instead of trying to take the desktop experience and extend it to a mobile device.
That's interesting. I want to come back to that idea. Let's go to you, Joseph, first.
Sure. So at Sprint, we feel very strongly that it's still about enabling the enterprise worker as a carrier. And so much like we introduced Workplace as a Service and one here at Enterprise Connect last year, in late 2015, we introduced a new offering, Mobility as a Service. And what that essentially does is it gives the enterprise an alternative to just surrendering to BYOD. And so for the corporate liable user, we set up a pretty easy to understand method where we have a matrix of devices and a couple of terms that they can pick with a plan type where they pick how much data they want. And then as part of that, with as few as 15 subscribers or as big as you want, what the customer enjoys is we'll load their applications, and then the experience perpetuates where the devices are refreshed. They get a white glove care, et cetera. So we think in enterprise, it's about enabling first, and then I'll talk more about what we want to do as we help enterprises deal with cacophony of devices and what all their users now want to do. So that's what we're doing first.
Okay. Brian?
So at VMware, we like to look at it as it's about enabling the customer, and your employees are your customers too. And I think that's part of where a lot of companies forget that your employees are your first customers, and they're interfacing with your regular customers all the time. And how do you enable them to get their work done? Because it's the same thing, whether you're giving something to a consumer or you're giving it to your employee. The question is, how do I make it easy for them? How do I keep them in the app? How do I allow them to get their workflow or their tasks done? And so, we're developing solutions, and we're actually partnering with, I think, everybody on the stage here, but many of the vendors who are here and exhibitors. But the goal here is, how do we make it simple to deploy, regardless of whether it's BYOD or a COPE device? How do we make it easy for users to sign in, share data between apps, and yet secure them, and make it easy to use?
Those are certainly common themes that have kind of perpetuated year after year, so I'm just kind of curious what's new now?
So what's new now is, for us, we've released VMware Identity Manager, and I don't want to make this a pitch, but in reality, identity has become big in the application game. And people don't want to have to remember all their passwords. They don't want to have to figure out, how do I sign into this one? Do I have to now sign into this other app to get this workflow done? And what you're starting to see is that the nature of apps is changing from single task, single focus to a workflow task. So you may actually open your email, have something from Salesforce that you have to address, and it's one single workflow, and you may never leave your inbox, whatever you're using for that. The same thing can happen in another app, but I think Josh mentioned before, mobile first and mobile only. They're not the same thing. The goal is to enable your users, regardless of the device that they're using, to get that workflow done and move on to the next thing.
Okay.
Well, when we start talking about development in the B2E space, there are a lot of different ways of doing this. First, it's been around for quite a while, from checking in rent-a-cars to getting your ticket scanned to get into the ballpark. It's just we seem to be expanding the scope today. Now, most organizations start with email, which is out-of-the-box application. To move beyond that, we have a lot of different choices. The ISVs, the Oracles, SAPs, McKesson, Salesforce, all have downloadable apps. Download the app, put in your credentials, you're mobile. Or we have package solutions, and I know a few of our participants here offer those, all the way on to custom developments, which is generally the most challenging of these. I'd like to start with first Lee and Joe. Could you, give us a quick rundown of what your organizations offer in each of those areas, and what sort of general guidance do you give customers? Do you roll your own or take something that's already packaged and canned? Lee?
Yeah, well, I think there's no, depending on where you are in the market, there's not a single answer to that question, and we provide all three. We have plenty of packaged apps that are either, specific to the task, and then we have a set of custom developed apps and programs that we do around that. And I think it depends on what you're trying to accomplish. If you're a smaller company and you're trying to target and fix one thing, a packaged app probably serves that purpose very well. But if you're talking about what we were talking about here just a second, in integrating workflow, you need some sort of custom way to do that because it needs to happen on a frequent occurrence, and there are new tasks that come out there. So to have a platform that allows you to do that, and I don't mean necessarily sell a platform, but if you have an integration layer to be able to do that, you can be quick and agile about making that happen. It may require a couple of tools. So we give advice, we provide all three of those, but we definitely, as you're a larger organization, you need to have that. We were working with an airline this fall. They had over 50 apps, lots of embedded infrastructure associated with that. And we created a hub concept associated with that, so it was personalized, and then they could use the apps that they needed to apply to the users, and it became real fast and agile for them to be able to do that. So it depends on where you are, and it takes all three to be able to serve it.
Joe, I know Sprint is quite a lineup in terms of fleet management, workforce management. What else you got?
Sure. So if we start at the simplest level, we are a purveyor of both Microsoft and Google's productivity suites. So as an example with Google, very oftentimes we'll use forms, and the customer's just going to kind of do their own simplistic thing and then tie it with sheets, and they get some business process improvement. Canvas, more of an off-the-shelf set of pre-configured applications that can be configured to that customer, not necessarily customized. That's probably too strong of a word. Then we also have app sheets, which is fairly interesting because it's the form concept, but they're all pushed down to an app on the user's device in such a way that as that app grows in complexity across different parts of the organization, there's an opportunity for more linkage. And then we also have offerings that are entirely customized, that involve consultation, and then we put that on our paper and then maintain that for the customer.
Wow. Now, Josh, Micheals kind of new getting into this. One of the parts of the recent Micheal mobility initiative that surprised me the most was your correspondence with FieldAware for field service. Is that a one-shot deal? Is this the first of many? This is a new tack for Micheal.
I would say it's the first of a focus group of apps that we see are true workflow enablement tools that will be taken into specific verticals, where we identify that there is the largest percentage of disenfranchised workers inside the environment that are separated from the traditional UC solutions that our customers tend to adopt into their organizations. So Mitel wants to meaningfully bring solutions to market where we can embed communications into vertical workflow apps and then connect those back into the enterprise. Traditionally, skills-based routing has been limited to a contact center type environment. But if you think about a field worker who's out on a customer location working on a product that they might need assistance with, you can apply skills-based routing to finding him an expert or her an expert, to where they could very easily in the app click to communicate. Based upon presence, you could identify available resources. Skills-based routing, you could find the right engineer to assist at that point in time. And then, of course, connect with voice, messaging, and video all real time. So we see that there's a tremendous opportunity to look at vertical applications. Horizontal apps, like Salesforce.com and a bunch of these others, widely adopted by knowledge workers, but we think vertical apps actually improve a lot of that workflow. It's interesting, there's an application that AT&T actually represents called ProntoForms. ProntoForms creates almost a middleware layer that connects the back-end office, ERP-type systems, and glues those together with forms that the field workers would have out in the field to complete important pieces of data, and then have that populate across multiple databases back into the back office. So it's a really good way to create this middleware layer that connects those field workers back into the knowledge worker environment.
Brian, I was going to ask you about identity management. Before we get to that, you're fairly recent to VMware AirWatch. You had spent a good deal of your career on the buying side of the equation here as a user of these things. So, what's your view on this? In terms of which tools are best and how?
Thank you. Yeah, I just joined VMware a little less than a year ago. I came from the enterprise, and it's heartening to hear what's happening, and being that I was on the IT side and on the innovation side, looking at what we're seeing with MBAS, mobile backend as a service companies, RMADs, remote rapid mobile application development, where they're actually taking many of these databases and these repositories of data and allowing you to mix and match to build those workflows. Because one thing to remember is not everybody's using a phone. You use the tool that makes sense where you are. So although we talk about mobile only, it's maybe the phone here, it may be a tablet somewhere else, it may be a Windows 10 desktop. And it's how you provide that digital workspace and bring all these apps together, get them to work together with identity. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't matter whether it's a SaaS app or it's an internal app. And it's how do you get those things to the user and actually remove the difficulty out of them. So I'm not going to name anybody, but for example, we had a ticketing system when I was in the enterprise that had over 60 fields that you were supposed to fill out. Nobody filled out more than 8 or 10. What do you do with mobile? You look at the 10 that everybody fills out, and that's that's the piece you do. I know you mentioned ProntoForms, and there are a couple others that do that. And it's a matter of figuring out what your users are doing, what their workflow is, and how do you help them meet it without making it more difficult.
Mm-hmm. Now, to your current life at VMware AirWatch, security and, of course, identity management is part of that, which has improved greatly since we got Touch ID and iVerify and facial recognition. But all the solutions these other guys are talking about here, do they interoperate immediately, or does it require modification to get them into one of your secure sandboxes?
So, yes and yes.
Okay.
Depending upon what the solution is, it may require some changes to it. But with our new identity solution, we integrate with whoever your identity provider is, whether it's Ping, Okta, if you don't have one, if it's Microsoft AD, Azure Active Directory Services, and you can use it with SaaS. So you can bring Salesforce into this container. You can use that, make sure that you have single sign-on, make sure that you can only access it on a device that's managed. And that becomes important because you want to secure your data. So you don't necessarily want somebody taking their regular phone, they're out and they're using Salesforce on it, and it may be jailbroken, maybe something else. You don't want them necessarily using a laptop where you don't know what's on it. Their kid may surf the web. You may have malware or something else on that. So you can actually put these in the secure containers. Mm-hmm. It's very simple. and you create that platform, or we're calling it digital workspace. And it's a digital workspace to make it consumer simple but enterprise secure for everybody.
The one of the other big themes that we're seeing in the mobility space when we talk about here at the show is the Internet of Things. Now, I'm trying to figure out where this is going to fit. We have the digital channels group, so the marketing group taking care of the B2C. We generally have the IT group who's taking care of the B2E. Is IoT going to be one of those two? Is it going to be a completely different line of business organization that picks this up? And Lee, since you're in the consulting end of this, let's start with you again.
Well, I mean, at AT&T, this for us, it's the biggest thing that we're doing right now. We've got over 30 million connected devices out there, and we're connecting them to all sorts of things that you couldn't imagine at this particular point in time, including cars and other things. For us, and I think for the future, if you kind of look at the users, users started out as basically transactors or users of data, and they've kind of started to move to collaborators. There's lots of UC and other things. We think the future is really you're an asset enabler, right? And so whether that be a customer or more likely an employee, and to get that information from an asset, whatever that asset is, to an employee so they can make a decision or even have made the decision already is hugely. We've got dashboards, we've got workflow, you can message it in, you can put it into the ticketing system. There's all sorts of things that you can do with it. And if you have the proper setup from the Internet of Things to your mobile app, I mean, let's face it, the people that are dealing with the assets, they're mostly mobile, right? They're mostly mobile, and that's who you need to do. So I think it's integrated. And I think it's a huge opportunity to really change the environment for the.
How do you get over the sort of, we want this, as a matter of fact, I think Roland Trollope kind of mentioned this in the UC Summit this morning, is we can push all this stuff to, from the cloud, we can push all of these cool enterprise apps, but we're going to push updates, automatically. Same thing with IoT. But the enterprise IT exec says, no, I want control over that. I want to know when I want to dictate when we update it. It's not going to be like that consumer model. How do you get over that in the enterprise? That seems to be a pretty big hurdle.
Well, for us, I think there's platforms that do that for you. And I think, using the IoT as the example here, what you have at the edge and what you control on the platform is a really big decision. And there's ways that you can do it at the edge and at the platform, and making that decision right based on the amount of data and the security is a complex decision. But once you learn how to do it, it's actually very effective. Yeah. Oh,
I was just going to say, and outside of the IoT realm, where you're just talking about the employees and the apps and not about that automated things.
Yeah, I think the reality is the depending on what operating system you have, the apps I think you can control. It's the operating system that you need to control on, and I think products like VMware and others need to be in this environment to help you do that. And we have good examples of where people have done it well and consciously, and other examples where it's actually out of control.
Okay.
So,
Joe, I know Sprint is very active in IoT. Where do you see this going?
Well, so the Internet of Things became the terminology, especially in this country. Our leader over at SoftBank would refer to it as the industrial internet, suggesting that any industry that was created after the Industrial Revolution is going to go through a major change because of what we are talking about now. I think when you say automation, or you say enhancing dispatch or contact center, one of the things in all of this that's really occurring, the complexity is the workflow. That's the real hard part. But what you're actually trying to do is reduce the intervention, so you don't need a dispatcher. Yeah. So there isn't a center for the contacts. And so the complexity that customers in any industry are faced with is the number of human beings that are looking at dated information, or do not know why they're calling, or they're not able to be intuitive. And so the winners are those P&L owners that choose to invest and deploy so that they digitize. And so, for example, at Sprint, we receive a lot of calls every month. We get awards for the customer care that we provide. So the real marriage is between IT and the P&L owner and the care organization, which usually transcends all those different owners within a corporation and enterprise. And so the idea is, how do you reduce the transactions so that it's all automated? So on our phones, we have something called Sprint Zone. So we're on a mission to enable our users to deal with their bill, their device upgrade, if they have an issue with coverage or anything else from the app that we're putting on the device. And interestingly, we're starting to see that kind of consumerization push back on the internal employees that are used to more of a concierge kind of service because we work here. Mm-hmm. And you know, I think that that's what really you're going to see is a reduction in human intervention. That's really the name of the game. That's where all the savings are. And any group that you talk about that you count employees is probably going to go down over time. It's not a good thing to say in an election year, but it just seems like that's what's happening. All groups are going to get smaller with fewer people to do the same function, but to derive more productivity, more revenue, but use fewer people. And I think that that's just kind of the way it is.
I'm afraid too many in our audience have heard that do more with less line before. Now, Brian, you brought up an interesting issue that we always deal with in security, which is the balance. That is, the more onerous and intrusive we make the security mechanisms. And I had to deal with like DoD security, where you had to change your password once a month. That had to be 10 digits, mixed characters. You could never repeat it, and you weren't allowed to write it down. Obviously, we're not going to go that far. And things like Touch ID or iris scans, iVerify, all of those have taken a big step in the right direction. Could you say a little bit about, one, are those playing into your single sign-on solution? And two, take it a little further down the line, because the other big issue we wrestle with today, as you mentioned, we manage the data, we don't manage the device, particularly the whole issue of data loss prevention.
Sure. So what's interesting is that biometrics, Touch ID, and the like certainly make it easier. And you know what people don't realize is it's not just who you are that you can sign in. It's, you know, I have a device that I always carry with me. Mm-hmm. This is my phone, and therefore I now have a second factor of authentication. I can put a certificate on this when you enroll. I can use that. But you know, part of what we're starting to look at, and something that VMware is very conscious of, is what we like to call posture-based security. You don't need DoD security necessarily to look at your email. Now, if you're Coca-Cola and you're talking about the formula for Coke, which they keep in a vault and only 3 people or whatever see, maybe you need DoD security for that. And if someone's going to look at that on this device, we may require them to be in a certain location. We may actually require a DoD password or a third form of ID, maybe an iris scan or something else. But why raise the posture on the device if they're never doing that? And really look at the apps they're using and what they're trying to do and making it easy for them to get that done. You know, I think that also fits into IoT. So, you know, the big question is, how do you manage a million things like you manage one? And, you know, one of the advantages you have with managing phones and tablets and all is there are a lot more of them than PCs. So you gain a certain expertise. But, you know, part of it is, even if we manage them and we secure them, and I thought, you know, you guys gave some great answers there. Getting to your original question, Beth, it's how do we provide context to people so that they can have that, they can be where they need to be? You know, based upon Joe's answer, get done what they need to get done when they need to get it done. You know what's coming in. You know how it's working. I talk about the Coca-Cola example. We help manage the Coca-Cola Freestyle machines. Coca-Cola knows in their Freestyle machines when they're going to break before they break. So the restaurateur or the movie theater that has them there doesn't know that they have a machine that's going to break in the next day or two. Coca-Cola can dispatch someone, fix it before it's broken, and they don't see downtime. And those are the types of things that you're changing the way things work and how people actually deal with things. And I think that, you know, along with security, because first of all, Coca-Cola doesn't want that data going to Pepsi, obviously, and, you know, vice versa. And it becomes the same thing of you don't want other people to know how your car is doing or the like, and it's securing it, making it, enabling it, and giving the context when it's needed.
Right. By the way, the other big secret in that safe is whether that's really Donald Trump's hair.
Well, I'll leave you with that one.
Josh, well, one other side of the Mitel mobility story that we don't hear very much about is the MVNO operation, Mitel Mobile. Is that somehow being brought in? Like, you seem to have a lot of different pieces between the Bhavani acquisition, now the Field Aware Association, obviously the traditional cloud-based and premise-based PBX solution. Give us a little idea how this crossword puzzle fits together.
Sure, thank you, Michael. So one of the key things that we've seen, as we've transitioned to LTE networks, Mitel's been an innovator when we've led the charge with voice over LTE technology for the back-end mobile network operator environment. What we've done from an advanced messaging standpoint, as a matter of fact, AT&T's launched that now, T-Mobile's launched that with us as well, and we've, at this point, got operators that have launched voice over Wi-Fi on 3 continents with Mitel's architecture. So from an IMS perspective, Mitel's a leader in that space. And what we did when we bought that asset was really took a look at the intersections of cloud, mobile, and enterprise, and we're bringing our expertise to bear in the fact that we have the largest, fastest growing UC as a service cloud in the industry today. We've got a very embedded, entrenched business, around 60 million end users using Mitel enterprise solutions, and now we've got mobile that we can really derive some very meaningful things around how we transition to new mobile cloud architectures. So the first thing that we've brought to market is the embedded communications piece, which leverages a lot of the back end of our Mitel mobile architecture and combines that with our contact center expertise around skills-based routing, and then extends that out through very easy to consume SDKs and APIs that can embed directly inside of other applications. So where your question was before, is it something that you take packaged off the shelf, or is it something that you build as an IT department that's specific to your industry, your company? Both are an option when you take a look at Mitel's portfolio across the board. And what we see is, as we continue to enable what the mobile network operators are doing, there will be additional components that they can take to enhance the way that their offerings go to market as well. IoT for us is really 2 key broad things. It's around connecting users to connected things. So for instance, identity management. I've got a mobile device, I jump in a corporate asset, a vehicle, and I'm driving in that vehicle for the day. You've got telematics that are on board. You want to tie that back to the user. You want to make sure that my mobile usage is limited while I'm in a driving state. You want to be able to track, breadcrumb location asset-based tracking for the day, what my journeys were and where I stopped and how long it took me to complete certain tasks. So that's one piece of it. And the other piece was really, to Joe's point, around the automation piece. It's about identifying, like the Coke machines, for instance, a generator or refrigeration unit that's going to be going out of service, getting that information into an automated workflow that can dispatch the right individual at the right time. So all those things are currently being enabled by Mitel's backend architecture around mobile.
Okay. Now, our overall theme here is how we make B2E more like B2C. Now, we'll start with Lee on this one because you're in the solutions business. If a client were to come to AT&T and say, we realize we've fallen behind in terms of this mobility in our internal applications, what do we do to get on the right track? Well, how do you start? What general advice do you give them to start moving down the path?
Well, I think there's 2 things that are hugely important, in assuming it's the IT person that's coming, is you've got to have a different partnership with your business. I mean, the rapid pace of the business that's going to bring those demands to you, you can't behave like you've behaved in traditional environments. You've got to be agile. And so you've got to have a partnership and a governance that's different than the governance that you've had historically. The second part is, if you're going to be able to do that, the demand and change and the pace of change is so much faster, you've got to have a way to deliver that. So the myriad of things that we've talked about here really come down to these 2 essential things, and it's being able to have an agile, quick way to deliver small, useful applications in a rapid format. And that requires tools and processes and things that do that. All of us have some form of those things which we provide, but you got to have that embedded in the corporation at a technical layer and a business user layer to make that work.
Joe, same question, and also if you have any customers, you don't have to identify them by name, that you've seen go through this transition, and can describe a little about what they did and the benefits they saw, to be great.
Sure. So just to use a real easy example, would be somebody that's in the ice making business, and they put bags of ice in a cooler outside of, every place you've ever been, right? So if that machine stops working, it's probably really bad, right, for the business.
Well, they can be in the water business.
They'll just have some water, that's right. So that's a fairly easy thing to identify, that you could put a device in there that's going to determine what the temperature is. It's going to know how many times the doors open and close, maybe a weight sensor. If you have two different size bags of ice, then you can tell as the bags are taken out, because of the weight, what people have a predilection to buy based on, whether it's a holiday weekend or not. And then, so then you can tie that in with the dispatcher, who in turn is routing the ice trucks. Maybe they also do some kind of preventative maintenance, or able to escalate differently. So probably the most important thing is when you start small like that, it's easier to prove in, because you have to save money, right? I mean, this idea of we're going to mobilize the application, I mean, you still got to come up with a cost. So to me, the difference with the consumer model and the enterprise model, so in highly transactional businesses that they do it the same way, like in a restaurant. So Open Table or Yelp with how they get their feedback, and that connective tissue in the social medias that touch it. Mm-hmm. So all of a sudden you have an entire industry that has changed in a relatively short period of time. So you've seen this with the asset tracking and the vehicle tracking, with large workforces that are in moving vehicles. That seems to have been something that has checked the box, and you're seeing that proliferate very quickly. So to me, what it means is that enterprises will probably start adopting more common ways of doing things, as opposed to trying to be differentiated in their workflow. They'll probably need to save money first in order to differentiate later, because you've got to reduce your costs in order to survive.
Brian, at what point in that adventure should they start thinking about security and management? Can they simply go through the app development, then at the 11th hour give you guys a jingle and away you go?
I would say at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
I think that if security isn't part of the process in the beginning, and from my time in the enterprise, the biggest thing you'd see is the line of business would go develop an app, get ready to release, and security would say no. Now, we have some tools, and there are other people with tools that make it easier for them to say yes, which is awesome. But you got to start looking at security in the beginning, and how do you develop in a secure framework? What are the capabilities that are there? How do you reuse existing things that are already secure? How do you feed into single sign-on? How do you feed into a secure container? How do we have the app config partnership that we announced with a bunch of other EMM vendors, or there are also SDKs and the like out there, which we all play with, that you can use for security, and build frameworks that allow you to build those apps and push them out, and actually be part of that and get that done.
Could you say a little more about the app config group? Because that was just announced at the Mobile World Congress a couple of weeks ago, and it sounded like it was going to address one of the big problems we've been facing with this from day one.
Sure. App config is a great group. It's actually, right now, there are 4 founding members with VMware, MobileIron, Jamf, and IBM. Mm-hmm. We expect some other EMMs to join. Yeah. And what we've done is we've said we have 60 members already who have pledged their apps, and whether they're SaaS or whether they have their own apps, Oracle, Salesforce, and the like. But the point is, develop a schema that makes it easy for people to develop these apps, make sure they're secured, make sure they're easy to enable for single sign-on, regardless of who uses it. One of the reasons we banded together is we need to make it easy for everybody. You shouldn't have to figure out which app you're getting, which is the one for your EMM vendor or anything else. Mm-hmm. Apple signed on, so this is actually on Apple's page. I would expect to hear something from the other side soon. So, this is really trying to be a standard and, be out there and open to everybody.
Great. Beth?
Well, we do have a couple of questions from the audience, so with that 2 minutes left, we might as well go and take one. And I think that, Brian, you were addressing this in that last question, but we do have a question about the best path forward with native app development for mobility. Is that with WebRTC? Is that with HTML5? Where do you see that? Any of you?
I'll start off and hand it real quick. I think that you need to do all of them, and I think it's a question of people get caught in a standard before trying to figure out what they're trying to build. Figure out what you're trying to build first, then figure out the standards that make sense, and are you building it for a laptop, tablet, phone, or all the like, and then figure out what works best for that versus saying, I'm only going to build HTML5, and that may not work well across everything.
Joe?
So I'm going second because I didn't get the sock method.
I'll write you next
Yeah.
time.
So, so one of our partners, Dialpad, formerly known as Switch, it was all about Google, and then they wanted to reinvent so that they could work very well with Google or Microsoft. So WebRTC was the path that they took, and so that's a real example that's taken place in the last few months.
It depends on the platform. It really does. When you think about the usability of a field workforce that's on tablets and mobiles, WebRTC is most likely not the right tool from a front-end exposure through a browser, but what we've done is we've been able to take WebRTC as an engine that connects the browser to SDKs that you embed inside of apps, and now it becomes usable on both fronts. So you really have to think about the application of the device and how it's being implemented.
Yeah. Lee, do you have any last thoughts?
Yeah, my quick one is, it depends on the user, because each user has different things, and our experience is you have to have both a hybrid and native environment to deliver to a comprehensive enterprise. And do that.
Well, and on that note, thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate your insight, and thank you all for attending.
Pleasure. Pleasure.
Good job.
Good job. Yeah.